It didn't happen in an uprising. It didn't happen in a war. It happened at a party. Between raised glasses and hollow smiles, a man's fate was sealed. That day, the entire palace took part in a murder. A reckless vow, an unexpected request, and a death that was ordered in cold blood. The most cowardly sentence in history began with a dance, and ended with the utter silence of the one who dared to speak truth to those who didn't want to hear it. You know the name of the victim, but you don't know the story behind his end. You don't know who truly orchestrated each step, or the fear that hid behind the applause, let alone the kind of influence that still feeds on the silencing of the righteous. This isn't just a story about an ancient crime, it's a pattern that repeats whenever truth becomes too uncomfortable to tolerate. Will you be ready for what's still to be revealed? Because in the end, you'll understand what one impulsive man set in motion when he said, "Ask me for anything, and I'll give it to you." He didn't come from the city, he didn't frequent palaces, he didn't wear fine linen or hold the status of a leader, but when John appeared in the wilderness, the silence of centuries condensed into a single voice, a voice that earned the right to be heard. There was nothing in him that suggested power, no official position, no title, no army under his command, and yet, when he spoke, the powerful trembled. His words cut through the dust of Galilee and exposed cracks everyone pretended not to see, and that was far too dangerous. John didn't seek attention, he confronted it. He didn't flatter religious leaders or curry favor with politicians, he called out their failures, named their sins, tore the polish off their appearances. His mission was simple and lethal: prepare the way, and that couldn't happen without making enemies. That's why he became impossible to ignore. His presence was a walking disruption, and when he confronted the ruler himself, publicly denouncing his unlawful relationship with Herodias, John crossed a line no one came back from. He didn't just bring it up, he exposed the wound, and he did it in front of a crowd. In any era, calling out the throne takes courage, but back then, it meant risking your life. Still, John didn't flinch. Though it may have looked reckless, his commitment to the truth outweighed his concern for safety. Jesus called him the greatest among those born of women, and it wasn't for his charisma or miracles, it was because John became the final link in an ancient promise, a promise that pointed, without hesitation, to something no one expected, yet it was exactly what they needed. The land was burning with rumors, the empire was tightening its grip, the hope of a Messiah hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. John didn't bring strategies, he brought repentance, and in doing so, he emptied speeches and exposed motives. There was no safe place to hide from his words, no position high enough to be shielded from them, and maybe that's why his voice disturbed so many, and so many started planning how to silence it. John didn't reveal a secret, he intensified pressure at the weakest point, and boldly exposed the instability behind the crown. From that moment on, no decision in the court felt secure. Soon, the prophet wouldn't be the only one caught in the middle of the tension, but also those who tried to ignore what he had brought to light. He had the title, but not the blood. Herod Antipas ruled under the weight of a crown he didn't inherit, he received it through political convenience. He was a decorated puppet, propped up by the Roman Empire, surrounded by symbols of power that didn't truly belong to him, and he knew it. Deep down, every banquet, every decree, every salute masked an uncomfortable truth: his authority was a concession. Inside the palace, opulence served as a disguise for insecurity. The halls, perfumed and gilded, concealed hushed conversations. Herod smiled in public, but his eyes always searched the shadows, where a name kept echoing in whispers. John the Baptist, a man with a plain appearance, but words that pierced through defenses like flaming spears. He didn't try to infiltrate the palace, he chose to tear down its walls with the force of public truth, and when he pointed out, in front of everyone, Herod's illicit relationship with Herodias, he left no room for interpretation. It was sharp, blunt, and brutal. Herod reacted like any cornered ruler, he had him arrested, but what was meant as a way to contain the problem only fueled more rumors and unrest. John's silence made more noise than many speeches. Even locked away, his presence grew, in the whispers of the people, in the nightmares of the ruler. Herod tried to rationalize it, but he couldn't ignore it. Herodias didn't even try to hide her disdain. She saw the prophet's imprisonment as a partial failure. For her, the only acceptable ending was complete elimination, and that desire, impatient and venomous, was beginning to close in on Herod from all sides. Galilee was boiling. Any hasty move could be seen as weakness. Rome was watching, the people were waiting, and Herod, trapped by his vanity and political pressures, realized that his next move wouldn't bring him victory, only a new kind of loss. Each visit to the prison, each postponed conversation, each silence within the palace walls tightened the trap around him, and he, who had ordered the prophet's arrest to put an end to the problem, began to realize he had lit a fuse. Soon, the cell would no longer be the center of attention, and the dilemma silently consuming him would take on a far more unsettling form, seductive, unpredictable, with a smile capable of unraveling what little sense he had left. And that's when an even darker figure would step in, with a trap that would realign the paths of a king and a prophet, of a reign and a prophecy, and Herod would find himself unable to undo what he had set in motion. His queen didn't inherit power either. She took it, not with weapons, but with a skill as precise as it was ruthless, turning scandal into advantage. Herodias didn't stand at the center of attention by accident. Every step was a calculated move on the palace chessboard. Before joining Herod Antipas, she was married to his half-brother, Herod Philip. It wasn't just a controversial transition, it was a direct affront to the laws and traditions that govern the faith of the people, and when John the Baptist denounced this union out loud, Herodias saw more than just a critic, she saw an enemy. He didn't accuse her behind closed doors, he exposed her openly. There was no room left for redemption or retreat. Her position, built on boldness and alliances, was under threat, and she would not allow it to be undone by the voice of a man from the desert. When Herod had John arrested, many thought the tension had eased, but Herodias knew the cell wouldn't silence him. Something more was needed, something final, and for that, she wouldn't use swords, she would manipulate the moment. Her weapon would be unleashed at the right time, carefully planned in silence, and executed amid laughter and wine. These maneuvers made some realize that this wasn't the first time a woman of the court had seen a prophet as a threat to her reign. In the queen, they saw echoes of another figure who once wrote her rage in blood, another time, another palace. Jezebel. Her body had been destroyed, but her spirit still lived, now clothed in new flesh. Herodias carried the same boldness disguised as elegance, the same poison served on golden trays, but she had refined her methods, to manipulate kings and silence prophets with a coldness that required no effort to be lethal. She didn't need to give orders, just create the right conditions. The rest would unfold naturally, each act conspiring in her favor. That was the plan, and every glance she cast, every carefully spoken word, was another piece moved into place. John may have been out of sight, but he wasn't out of danger, because in the heart of the palace, someone was already rehearsing the strike that would end his mission, with a performance as elegant as it was fatal. At last, the fateful day had arrived. She entered quietly, but not a single step was innocent. Salome glided through the hall, radiating grace and beauty. Yet beneath the softness of her gestures, something heavier stirred. She hadn't come to entertain, she had come to fulfill a mission rehearsed for flawless execution. Her presence wasn't the king's whim, it was part of a greater mechanism. Her dance at that banquet was far more than a performance, it was a tool of influence. Seductively, she turned her movements into instruments of persuasion, testing boundaries, lowering defenses. Every gesture, every glance was a veiled threat, and in that Galilean palace, Salome knew exactly what she represented, not just a decorative piece at the party, but the key element in a satanic plan crafted moments earlier, outside the hall. Herod watched, entranced. The wine dulled his reasoning, while vanity amplified his illusions. With that performance, he believed he was in control, but it was strategic seduction, and the spotlight was on him. The guests didn't know whether to applaud the art or fear the outcome. Something in the air made it clear, this was no ordinary performance. When the dance ended, the silence grew heavy. The king, intoxicated and captivated, spoke too loudly, and promised more than he should have. "Ask me for anything, even up to half my kingdom." A phrase repeated by monarchs across centuries of Eastern history, but rarely tested in earnest. Spoken there, with glazed eyes and blurred judgment, it became the green light for an irreversible act. Salome didn't answer right away. She went to her mother. Herodias, until then composed, leaned in discreetly. The answer had long been prepared. The king waited, smiling, still dazed. When Salome turned back, the entire hall held its breath. The pause between the promise and the reply felt endless, but the request she was about to make had no place in the context of that celebration. It would drain the room of air, and the guests of color. John was out of sight, but still in play, and in that brief space between dance and desire, something had been set in motion, something no feast could digest, because in that exact moment, unnoticed by all, destiny began to move swiftly. The hall was still pulsing with the charm of the dance when Salome approached the throne. The tension, thick as invisible smoke, swept through the room. Then, with the calm of someone merely delivering a note already written, she spoke. She didn't ask for gold, or land, or titles, just a name, and a platter. The demand hit like a bomb: the head of John the Baptist. The impact was instant. Herod froze, the wine turned sour in his mouth, the throne became a golden prison. Surrounded by watchful eyes and pride teetering on the edge, the king realized he was no longer in charge. Herodias watched in silence, and demanded compliance. The guests seemed to forget how to breathe. The music had stopped, the celebration lost its tone, threat filled the air. Horror now had form, moving among goblets and trays like an uninvited guest. Herod hesitated, a flicker of retreat crossed his face, but between fear and humiliation, he chose to preserve what little authority he had left. He nodded, and the soldiers moved. In the cell, John didn't flinch. He wasn't surprised. He knew the cost of pointing to what others feared to see. The sound of footsteps drawing near only confirmed what heaven already knew: the end of his mission had come. The blade did its work, and soon, the same footsteps returned to the banquet, carrying a symbol of what corrupted power can produce: a silver platter, now bearing a silenced voice. When Salome handed the trophy to her mother, the palace sank into something no tapestry could conceal. The crime hadn't eliminated an enemy, it had only exposed what was already rotting from within. But the blood that stained that platter didn't stay silent. It marked the beginning of an unrest that would slowly ferment behind the curtains of power, until it reached the one who could never be controlled by it. John's blood still seemed to cry out in the dry air of Judea, as if the earth had swallowed a secret it refused to digest. Herod had tried to put an end to a nuisance, but instead, he awakened a question that would echo through the centuries, and still lingers today like a shadow over faith: why did God allow it? Why wasn't the greatest among those born of women spared? God's silence in the face of injustice has always scandalized those who expect instant rescues and happy endings. John was the friend of the bridegroom, the final link in the Old Covenant, the one who prepared the way for the Messiah. His mission wasn't to save himself, it was to clear a path for others to walk, and that path, to be accessible, had to be washed in blood. His abrupt end wasn't a failure of the plan, it was part of it. He proclaimed the kingdom of God just as much as he exposed the cost of its arrival. In his death, there was both a warning and a promise. The system that saw itself as unshakable revealed its fragility by fearing the voice of a single man. The palace that flaunted its power exposed its poverty by needing to silence a prophet to maintain the illusion of control. It was a preview of what was coming. Jesus, like John, would not escape the fury of institutional power. Two innocent men, two twisted verdicts, two bodies delivered into the hands of rotting authorities. John's fate was a quiet announcement of the cross to come, and the cross, as we know, was not the end of the story. The voice that cried out in the wilderness was silenced, but not extinguished. The echo of his message survived both the blade and the banquet's applause. It crossed time, reached multitudes, and continues to pierce the walls of human pride. In every generation, when power tries to silence justice, John's frequency returns, disrupting, confronting, reminding us that truth may be silenced, but its impact can never be contained. Those who celebrated John's end never imagined that the blood they thought forgotten would not rest. It moved like a finely tuned scale, bearing the weight of every guilt, and soon it would demand the price of the souls who rejoiced, unaware that the echo of that prophetic cry still had targets left to reach. The years passed, but the apparent stability of Herod Antipas's court slowly rotted from the inside out. The man who once ruled Galilee with the appearance of authority ended up a ghost of his former self. Rome, which had once propped him up, turned its back. His betrayal of his brother, his scandalous relationship with Herodias, his political missteps, everything became a growing burden in the eyes of an empire that didn't tolerate weakness, and when the emperor finally withdrew his favor, Herod and Herodias were cast into exile, left to die far from the lights of power, consumed by the very obscurity they had feared. But while Herod's downfall was slow and humiliating, Salamis became the stuff of legend. It is said that one night, as an adult far removed from the halls that had once exalted her, she slipped while crossing a frozen lake. The ice cracked. As she struggled to escape, her body became trapped between the sheets. The desperate thrashing of her head in search of air, combined with the crushing pressure of the ice, led to a brutal end, decapitated by nature's cold hands. A death that echoed with sinister irony the fate of one who had once asked for a prophet's head. Whether the story is historical fact or symbolic legend hardly matters, because what it reveals is far greater. No dance performed against the truth escapes unscathed, and no injustice toasted with wine and applause will go unanswered when the curtain of time finally falls. John the Baptist didn't fall on a battlefield or before an army, nor under the weight of any crime. He was silenced because he dared to expose what everyone knew, but no one admitted. He died in a cell, between cold stones and rusted chains, not for being a criminal, but for being righteous and true. His blood stained the floor of a hall that preferred applause over repentance, and on that gleaming platter, it wasn't just the head of a man that rested, it was the cost of a conscience tainted by a corrupt kingdom. What seemed like the end of a prophet was, in truth, the beginning of a march that would never be stopped, a clear sign that when the voice of truth is silenced by force, it spreads even more. John came to announce the kingdom he had seen, where swords don't triumph over the word. He came to prepare the way, and even in death, he kept paving it. The sword stopped his speech, but not his mission. Every drop spilled became a seed, and every silenced cry an echo louder than the voices of a decaying court. While Herod, Herodias, and Salome faded into shadows of a story far greater than themselves, John became a reference. The man who lived in the wilderness became an eternal voice in the kingdom. The one who didn't dress like a king or speak like a courtier was the one who exposed the rot of the throne and revealed the urgency of heaven. And maybe what strikes us most in this story isn't the cruelty of Herodias, or the cowardice of Herod, but the silence of the crowd, who watched, smiled, applauded, and consented. There are moments when omission weighs more than the blade, and laughter in the face of injustice is just as complicit as the hand that carries it out. And in today's world, where voices are many and truth is reshaped to suit every taste, the greatest danger may not be the tyrant, but the crowd that's grown used to watching him reign. The story of John the Baptist leaves us with a troubling question: who is speaking the truth today? And who is trying to silence it? Would you have the courage to be John in a time like this? Or would you become just one more among those who applaud while truth bleeds? If this story spoke to you in any way, Don't let that feeling fade. Click the like button right now. It tells YouTube this content matters and helps more people receive stories like this. Share in the comments which part impacted you most. Your voice here is part of the message we want to spread. And to keep receiving these revelations, watch the video we've linked in the description and the final card. You'll likely find in the next few words exactly what you need to hear today. And never forget this: when God looks for someone who won't compromise the truth, heaven may find in you the best path to touch the earth. Because among all the noise of a world that's grown used to applauding what's wrong, the greatest revolution may still be just this: someone like John, willing to lose everything except their voice.